describe attachment as a safety conditioning learning process. Whether a child perceives the world as a safe place or dangerous place is dependent on their relationships with primary caregivers and significant adults. When insecure attachment develops, a child's ability to trust any adult, even those who want to help or support, is vastly undermined. Infants and young children interpret the responses of caregivers and significant adults to their needs and develop behaviors and self-concepts associated with those perceptions. If a caregiver's response to a child is inadequate or distressing, particularly if that response occurs frequently or is unpredictable, the child will develop behaviors to protect themselves when the cues for those responses are exhibited by the caregivers. By the time most children reach school, the cues and associated responses are well established and part of a repertoire of behaviors easily triggered. Learning has always been relational. If the development of initial attachments is impaired, future relationships and life conditions do have the potential to mitigate and repair any delays or deficits, or they can compound the harm from early childhood. The process of the trauma response involves three primary brain regions. The limbic system, the main region for emotion generation, is dramatically impacted by trauma. Ongoing trauma response activation can derail connections between the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system, making self-regulation virtually impossible without explicit instruction, intervention, and practice. The prefrontal cortex does not fully develop until the mid-20s, thus the inconsistent abilities of young people to use their executive functioning and higher order thinking skills. Trauma adds another layer of complexity that can delay prefrontal cortex development and strong connections among brain regions even further. The cumulative effects of multi-layered trauma can lead to significant deficits in cognitive functioning and self-regulation unless educators introduce effective interventions. The earlier, the better. The trauma response originates in the subcortical region, where autonomic functions occur below our consciousness, like breathing. The threat detection system resides here. A student's perception of danger to their well-being can activate the threat detection system without their conscious awareness, immediately sending a signal to the limbic system, which floods the brain with cortisol and other stress chemicals. This process hijacks the prefrontal cortex, making quick action possible, but higher order reasoning and learning impossible. If the perception of a threat continues, the prefrontal cortex cannot be fully accessed as the brain continues to be flooded with stress chemicals. Thus, educators must understand the student's perception of physical and psychological safety and establish those conditions before higher order thinking, executive functioning, or learning can occur. Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to activate new neurons and build new neural connections and patterns throughout the lifespan. It is never too late for a teacher to assist a student in creating new neural patterns as alternates to the survival behavior patterns developed before the child was self-aware or had a conscious choice in the matter. Trauma-sensitive practices and equity-centered work are partners in the drive towards making a high-quality, challenging, and well-supported educational experience a right for every student. The emerging field of epigenetics provides evidence that experience alters gene activation and that the altered genetic expression can be inherited. Epigenetics and an increased understanding of the multi-layered trauma experienced by society's marginalized populations intertwines culturally responsive teaching and social justice and equity approaches with trauma-sensitive education. Restorative justice, which focuses consequences on repairing harm caused to self, relationships, and the community, is remarkably effective when working with students from all backgrounds, especially those with insecure attachment and traumatic experiences. Combining all of these practices which requires similar skills and abilities from educators, has the potential to halt the school to prison pipeline. Theories of the relational nature of developmental psychology and how students learn are now supported by neurobiological studies. Systems theory and theories of resilience are repeatedly validated and have implications for educational frameworks. Systems theories assert that a child's neurobiological development depends on their interactions with their environments. As seen in this diagram, there are many layers of environments that interact with each other as they affect a child's development. Schools, classrooms, and educators are an important layer in a student's development. Resilience research consistently finds that one of the most significant protective factors for children and adolescents is at least one positive caring relationship with an adult. The impact of increased positive interactions and connections on brain development and functioning, in addition to the ability to adapt to a larger world, is extremely significant. Somatic symptoms are the result of storing toxic stress and trauma in the body. Students and educators may experience these physical symptoms. Living in environments with continual exposure to trauma and ongoing toxic stress adversely affects the body's health, as the mind and body are a unified whole rather than separate entities. Educators must elevate their awareness of their social emotional abilities and develop them to meet the needs of today's students. Infusing teacher preparation programs with efficient, effective methods for developing these competencies is pivotal to teacher success. Consult the teaching certification standards for the states of Washington and Massachusetts. Developing these abilities empowers educators because the process raises their awareness and understanding and leads to more effective approaches to relationships. Teaching. The next two slides are an extensive, although not exhaustive, list of the impacts of trauma on students and their learning. This list illustrates the uniqueness of each student's response to trauma and the variability of behaviors present even within a single child. Trauma adds another dimension to the already changeable natures of children and adolescents that increases the unpredictability of their abilities and behaviors. This inconsistency in behaviors and abilities can be confusing to teachers and lead to an erroneous belief that a student deliberately disrupts class just for the sake of causing trouble. In point of fact, most behaviors are a result of triggers in the present environment that activate past traumatic experiences and the associated responses ingrained in students for the purposes of survival and self-protection. Educators must recognize that when demands exceed skill level due to a specific developmental stage or the impact of trauma, disengagement, quitting, and challenging behaviors arise. Many students cannot leave it at the door as is often expected. Acquiring an awareness of the variety of trauma manifestations that can potentially occur in the classroom empowers educators to cope more skillfully and effectively with the challenges they face every day. Vanette reminds us that trauma is a lens, not a label. The importance of looking at trauma through a lens versus using trauma as one more label is very clear when observing the harm caused by stereotypes attributed to labels assigned to human beings. This harm is more disturbing when early damage is caused by the restrictive and erroneous beliefs, biases, and assumptions associated with the labels assigned to children and youth by every level of society and in education. Research shows consistently that students perform according to their teachers' expectations, and for traumatized students, providing the appropriate relational support to meet those expectations is just as necessary. Prepared teachers can offer sufficient and precise supports to their students to meet their high expectations. Trauma-sensitive approaches require changing educators' narratives or the stories they tell themselves about how students learn and the etiology of student behaviors. Opening teachers' perspectives to other possible explanations for barriers to learning and challenging behaviors increases teachers' effectiveness. Educators' ability to walk in the shoes of their students may be limited by personal experience, but increased knowledge and awareness and empathy and connection can assist teachers in understanding their students' perspectives. Effective front-loading can positively impact the entire school year. Educators can build positive classroom environments by collaborating with students to create expectations for classroom interactions that prioritize respect, connection, and community well-being, as opposed to demanding compliance to a predetermined set of rules. Determining how these expectations look and the behaviors they entail through group interaction is one of the first opportunities to build trust and connection and teach group collaboration skills. Front-loading, offers teachers an opportunity to communicate that they hear, see, and value their students. Teachers can model the behaviors agreed upon and provide time for role play, practice, and group reflection so that students can gain clarity or modify the behaviors to better exemplify the expectations. Agreeing on consequences for failing to meet expectations that are not arbitrary or contrived helps students connect their behaviors to real consequences and build personal accountability for making amends and developing action plans to prevent repeat performances. Restorative justice practices are particularly relevant in building agreements about classroom and school-wide expectations. Developing awareness of the real-world relational harm of behaviors to themselves and others helps students develop intrinsic motivation to persevere in their growth and learning. To implement trauma-sensitive practices with fidelity, educators must take the time and energy necessary to accomplish front-loading. Earning students' trust and building community begins with a purposeful front-loading process. Educators who do build strong, positive relationships with students have the best chance to facilitate students' development and learning. Building trust, especially with students who have good reasons for not trusting adults, takes directed time and deliberate effort. However, the front-loading is well worth the extra time and energy, as it will create a respectful, supportive, and productive classroom that increases student engagement and improves their performance and optimizes teachers' instructional time and well-being. Trauma can be transformed. It does not have to be a life sentence. When children first enter school, safe and welcoming classrooms where they feel like they belong, warm teachers who recognize students' needs and provide the congruent responses and opportunities to practice pro-social behaviors, improve their expressive and receptive language and academic performance as their schooling progresses. Altering teachers' understanding about the origins of behavior can help educators amend their beliefs, and eliminate their assumptions about their students and prevent teachers from placing limits on them. Behaviors observed in the classroom were adopted by students for a self-protective purpose. In a specific context, at some point in time, these behaviors serve to protect the students and facilitate their survival. And moreover, may still be adaptive in a specific context. More challenging and aggressive behaviors are associated with extreme relational trauma or abuse. These behaviors indicate a greater need for connection and relationships, despite the appearance of hostility. However, educators must avoid the tendency to state outright or imply that students' self-protective behaviors are maladaptive in all settings because that often engenders incredulity and distrust. Many educators presume to know, but most likely will never fully understand where their students have come from and what they must go home to every day. Validating students' experiences means acknowledging their reality and at times the very real need for their survival behaviors. Validating students' emotions and the reality of their lives communicates respect and the desire to understand student experiences. Validation and respect, along with a sincere desire to learn about students, builds connection and trust. The trusting relationship between teacher and student is what creates space for educators to suggest alternate behavioral responses for the classroom. Acknowledging that learning does not occur in a vacuum frees educators to direct energy towards relationship building. According to Brummer and Thorsborn, educators must continually ask themselves, what part of the brain are my students in right now? In order for learning to occur, the needs for physical and emotional safety along with connection must be met. Given our understanding of brain functioning during trauma responses, movement up through the brain by deactivating the threat detection system, followed by connecting to help co-regulate emotions, is what allows students to move into the prefrontal cortex. The first two processes must be accomplished for activated students to learn. Relationship building is complex in the best of times. Trauma complicates the process even more. The dialectic states that building relationships with traumatized students requires educators to provide unconditional acceptance and caring for each child as they are in each moment, while also believing unequivocally in their ability to grow and learn a new way to be in the world. A student must believe that they are valued for who they are as they are before they will buy into the belief that they can move towards who they truly want to be. Teachers must value students for who they are rather than what they accomplish. Educators' ability to connect with students and engender that feeling of being valued is what allows them to foster growth and learning. Authenticity is a critical element to trauma-sensitive practices and requires self-knowledge and awareness. These capacities allow educators to adapt practices to fit their personalities and evolving abilities and skill sets, while also meeting the unique needs of their students. Students who have been exposed to trauma can tell if their teacher is wearing a mask to play a role or if they are authentically present in their teaching. Educators need to learn how to be themselves while setting healthy boundaries. Within authenticity, teachers can make any practice their own while maintaining the essential effective components. It is always uncomfortable learning new skills in the beginning, but with practice and a personal touch, trauma-sensitive approaches become viable and effective. Adolescence is a critical period of neurobiological development, second only to infancy in its importance. Freshmen come to high school having experienced 14 years of life and at least 9 years of schooling. Most of these students have experienced trauma by this age, in life and in school. High school is the last opportunity for educators who have the greatest access to teenagers other than their caregivers to repair and mitigate harm that may have been done in their first 14 years. This repair can only be accomplished through trust and connection. Too often, high school educators divorce themselves from the relational aspect of teaching and learning, or swing to the opposite extreme and in their earnest desire to help students, fail to set healthy boundaries. Either extreme has risks for both teachers and students. Preparation programs must explicitly teach their candidates how to build trusting relationships with healthy adult-adolescent boundaries. Because of the adolescent life stage is characterized by gradual distancing from caregivers, high school is a crucial time for educators to step up and become mentors and guides. An educator who can build a trusting relationship with a teenager has a powerful impact on their outcome. High school educators must consider that after students leave school, there is no large-scale mechanism for reaching as many adolescents, making these teachers the last line of defense against adverse outcomes. High school educators have the power to stop the school-to-prison pipeline through building strong connections, developing essential abilities, learning relevant skills, and demanding the requisite education, training, and support to do so. Keeping students in comprehensive high schools provides the best odds for students to thrive after they leave school instead of merely surviving or possibly sinking. For the most part, alternative schools fail to provide the skills students require for advancement in this society, but the need for alternative educational settings continues to grow, primarily due to the inability or unwillingness of comprehensive high schools to adapt their philosophies and practices to the diverse needs of their students. Building trusting relationships with students is the foundation of all learning. Facilitating the development of trust among students in a class is the key to creating a positive, supportive environment. Without these relationships, traumatized students will not learn, and no one in the classroom will operate at their optimal level. However, building trust requires a trustworthy educator. Honest self-evaluation demands courage because it makes the person feel vulnerable to admit there are any areas where they may need to improve. The avoidance of vulnerability comes from a place of fear and is common to human nature. However, genuinely knowing oneself, even the parts one may not like or believe others will not like, is the first step towards understanding and connecting with traumatized students. Preparation programs can offer safe spaces for candidates to practice self-reflection and self-evaluation and benefit from group support in building self-compassion. To engage in practices such as de-escalation and co-regulation, in which a well-regulated, calm teacher helps an activated student regulate his emotions, requires self-awareness. These practices facilitate the learning process, the primary role of educators, to help teachers stay emotionally regulated without depersonalizing from the students. Preparation programs can provide space and guidance for candidates to identify their personal triggers, develop the ability to evaluate their moods and stress levels day by day or moment by moment if necessary, so they are able to recognize when they have been triggered and push the pause button. Teachers may eventually use their own process to model the technique for their students. A teacher who can regulate their emotions is empowered because they then have the choice about how to respond to a situation or to their student, rather than react without reasonable thought and possibly further escalate a potentially explosive situation. Viktor Frankl wrote that between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our responses. In our response lies our growth and freedom. Students need teachers who are attuned to their own and their students' emotions and moods so that prevention is possible. Teachers can assist students in developing personal strategies to deactivate themselves. An aware teacher recognizes when a student becomes activated and assists them in applying their strategies to prevent the inevitable firefight should the situation continue to escalate. Connecting to students and reestablishing the relationship during and after an emotionally distressing situation is the first step in the de-escalation process. An essential component of reconnecting is the ability of an educator to be aware of their own biases, eliminate them from the process, and listen to a student's perceptions and emotions about their experience without judgment. Judgment can be reflected in language and tone, and through body language and facial expressions, and judgment always reveals itself in the eyes. If an educator feels judgment, the student will feel it too, even if the teacher is unaware of their subconscious judgments or of communicating them to the student. Delving into the self is the only method for discovering biases and assumptions in one's subconscious. To exclude a child when they are emotionally distressed by sending them out of the classroom, using timeouts that the children perceive as punishment, or using language like "I will not speak to you until you've calmed down" is the opposite of what traumatized students need. Most traumatized students experience insecure attachment and have not developed healthy self-soothing or self-regulation skills. They view these exclusionary practices as another reason not to trust adults, derailing the trust-building process. Educators can use moments of emotional distress to connect to students and co-regulate their emotional state. After calm has been restored, educators can turn the experience into a teaching moment for their classes in how to be aware of one's emotional state, self-soothe, and self-regulate in order to think clearly again. De-escalation through co-regulation and connection must come before an educator can guide a student to reflect on their own mistakes or harm done to themselves, others, or the community to determine how to make amends and move forward. It can be extremely difficult to earn students' trust and very easy to lose it. Students push teachers to prove their belief based on childhood experiences that no adult can be trusted, especially those in positions of power who make promises they don't keep. And generally, the student's belief is reinforced because educators are not prepared to cope with students' methods of testing them. Students who experience ongoing cumulative trauma begin to feel helpless, hopeless, and trapped. These feelings are easily triggered by the hierarchical power structure of the school setting. Teachers and administrators who demand compliance and respect simply by virtue of their position can easily trigger a traumatized child. Natural respect must be earned through demonstrating trustworthiness, sincere care, and mutual agreements regarding expectations and consequences. The more choices students have and the more they feel heard and valued, the better chance they can undo learned helplessness and move out of the hopeless, powerless, and trapped feelings that interfere with their learning and progress. To gain more engagement from distrustful and seemingly disinterested students, teachers can collaborate with them in a developmentally appropriate manner regarding the curriculum and concepts they must learn. Furthermore, educators can ask for student input regarding the best methods to teach those concepts. When students feel they have input in their own learning process, buy-in increases. Asking for student feedback regarding the success or failure of specific lessons and teaching methods assists educators in modifying their practices and materials for more engagement and efficacy. Along with self-awareness, self-regulation, and self-reflection, educators require self-compassion to engage with students exposed to trauma. Implementing trauma-sensitive practices requires appropriate training, tools, and support, and educators must commit to self-care to continue to be present for their students and aware of their own emotions and needs. The pervasive, destructive impact of trauma on our students' ability to learn and function in school and in their lives can be comprehensively addressed with evidence-based interventions. A shift in how we view our students and our roles as educators will result in lasting change to our educational practices. Teacher educators have the power to lead the way in setting the standards for how programs prepare and support teachers to educate their students. Educators are in a uniquely influential position to advocate for students more so than any other profession serving children and adolescents. Teacher educators are in the best position to advocate for the preparation needs of our teachers. Educators are responsible for exactly two jobs: facilitating the teaching and learning process and creating opportunities for students, tasks which require specific knowledge and skill sets. The requisite knowledge and the relevant skill sets have evolved as the current student population faces a reality for which the educational system and those within it are not prepared. The education system is still pushing out the same students it always has while growing their numbers. Many of the students the system erases are still strong, resilient fighters and survivors until they are removed. If teacher education programs can provide the skills and abilities educators truly need to facilitate these students' learning and empower them through all available opportunities, our society will follow these students' lead as they affect positive changes in communities across the nation. Strong, effective leadership comes not only from academic knowledge, but from overcoming personal struggle, fighting for empowerment, and building the resilience to thrive. When educators succeed in teaching our fighters, these students possess the capacity to enhance society's awareness of viable methods to address challenges, unite separate factions working to ensure equal rights for all people, and inspire and lead the transformation of society and education. I made it.
So, thank you so much for your passion and commitment to this work, Jennifer. You know, when Suda and I were planning the topics that we were going to cover and how we might lay them out through the year, you know, we thought about, you know, we're 19 days into it, but you know, what a positive New Year's resolution it would be, right, to try and tackle some of these issues in the classroom. So I hope that's kind of a takeaway that everyone has for the first presentation. I know you also had some resources or a link that you wanted to share with everyone. And I want to remind everyone, I know people were joining at different times. Again, we are recording this. So if you missed part of Jennifer's or you want to go back and review some of the things that she was saying, because I think there's a lot of positive statements. Suda was doing an awesome job in the chat, kind of highlighting things that stuck out to her. So that'll be there for you. But yeah, I mean, I want to ask if there are any questions, and then Jennifer, if there are any resources or links that you'd like to share with folks.
Well, that first, I believe it was back on one of the first slides. Oh, there it is. That's my website. If you go to the resources page, there is a very large list of resources for trauma-informed education. There are some previous webinars I have done where I did not break down and cry. And I have created a list specifically for this webinar of the best comprehensive resources by topic. So I believe there are 2 or 3 specific to this webinar. They're all start with the CACEC January webinar, but there are a lot of other resources there. Some are research-based, some are practice-based. Pretty much everything I could find is on there. So you are more than welcome to go there. You can look at my CV or about me, which is on there, and whatnot. So.
Great, thank you again. Thank you so much. I want to stop now. I know I said we would harvest questions in the chat, but if there are any that are jumping out to you now, if you want to use the raise hand feature in Zoom, if you go to reactions, you can do that there. And we'll give you some time to have Cynthia kind of queue up her presentation. I know she just put some helpful information into the chat, but I just want to pause for a second and see if anyone has any questions that they would like to pose to Jennifer. And now we'll all play the awkward Zoom silence game for a second.
And I promise not to break down and cry when you ask me a question. Actually, I can't make that. I can't guarantee that.
And then Jennifer, again, I invite you to hang out. I think Cynthia's presentation is going to pair nicely with yours.
Of course.
And I invite you to, you know, now that you're not presenting, kind of scroll through the chat and kind of see some of the +1s and, you know, shout outs that you are getting. But we'll go ahead and let's see. have Cynthia go ahead and transition. Cynthia, do you want me to help you recruit some participants, or do you want to kind of lead that effort?
That would be great. I would love to be able to share my screen, and that would be able to let me put up the slides.
You should be able to do that now.
Okay, let me try that again. Oops. There we go. Screen. And where am I? Okay. So now I have to move something out of the way. I have a lot of different technical things that are going on here, and so it's going to be a lot of fun. Thank you again, Jennifer. You did all the research, so now I just have to throw in a couple of quotes, because really what I'm talking about is what are some of the tools that you can use? What are some of the things that I've used to really build on that awareness and awareness of the types of things, the subtle types of things that can be influencing our kids. And I work primarily through as an educational therapist of twice exceptional students. So my kids they might be in the gifted realm, and they might also have ADHD and ASD. They could be true alphabet kids with all sorts of labels, or they could just be floundering. Their parents know they're really bright. They're not being identified. What are we going to do with this kid because they don't want to go to school? And so that's school trauma is where my work happens, and how to help those kids heal. I graduated, I got my doctorate at the Bridges Graduate School for Cognitive Diversity in Education. And one of the things that they offer is a certificate program for those of you who don't want a doctorate or already have a master's, or you just want to know more about what this idea of twice exceptional and the emotions that go with it and gifted. So they have a 1-year program that also introduces a lot of hands-on tools. I got into this, I was a teacher, and then I had kids, and kids change our lives and makes this whole process incredibly emotional. So I've been where Jennifer's been in not being able to talk because I've been so empathic with students, my own students, or with my kids. So these are my 2 kids, one incredibly insatiably curious and an avid reader before he could read, just has this natural sense of language and curiosity. But he was one of those kids that would never repeat himself. If he did an assignment and you wanted to test him on it again 3 weeks later, he wouldn't necessarily do it because he already had done it. And so what's the problem with you? So he was a real conundrum for me. But then there was my other child. Yes, there's no photograph of him because this is him. This is an illustration that he created for me. And it really was his relationship with reading, even though his mind was going a mile a minute, and he would come up with these amazing put together ideas, amazing spatial reasoning. But because he couldn't read, and they are both in their 20s now, mid-20s and above, but because he couldn't read, that was his identity. He was not smart. He could not be smart. He got into the gifted program, but he didn't fit that mold because his reading was so slow. So this was a statement that hit my heart, and I had to figure this out. So my life changed. I went into gifted education and tried and kept going until I've gotten my doctorate. So what am I going to try to do today? I'm going to try to really kind of do a brief overview because I have limited time, talking about what twice exceptional is. We're going to keep recruiting for, Matt is going to keep recruiting for the game that's going to come up in a minute. And in the game, we're going to explore the attributes of our cognitively diverse community and the implicit biases that influence their identity. And then we're going to talk about some of those, nurturing those, I keep hearing noises. Oh, we got chats. Okay. Embracing paradoxes and nurturing positive self-identity. I'm sorry, my computer is alerting me and I had to figure out what it was alerting. So there's a couple of chats, which I can't see at the moment. So anyway, so we at Bridges kind of talk about the idea of being green. Green is a really interesting color. It is a multitude of colors. But when we talk about it, we talk about the idea of this bright, shiny, everybody wants to be gifted, everybody wants to be thought of as bright yellow. And then we think of the disappointment, and I'm being very general, of having a child who's struggling in school. And we have this mythology in the general public, and I am definitely stereotyping here, and I know it, that to be gifted is either elitist or to be super smart, like my son believed, and to be learning disabled is to be broken or to have special everythings. And so those are the colors. But when you're gifted, often you get that gifted label. But if you're twice exceptional and in the gifted program, then anything that's not working is ignored in most cases, unless you have a super gifted teacher who understands this population. And that's very much what Jennifer was talking about, is you have to understand and be aware of who these kids are. Going to the other side, when you have challenges, you're going to get into resource, you're going to get support. The teachers understand what ADHD is if they have to sit, quote, in the front of the classroom, which is not always the best place. We know that if you're here, but this is the stereotype again of a child who needs to be right in front of the teacher, but at least it's something. They might get counseling, they might get, like I said, pull out or push in or separate class resources. They have an identity that's going to get them support. Gifted is not funded. It may or may not get support. But what happens if the child is in those resource classes and there is an opportunity for a gifted class, but they're at the same time, which is really common in a lot of schools around me? Then they're not going to be seen for their gifts. They're going to be seen for what do we need to fix about them? We need to fix these kids. And I want to move away from that idea of having to fix these kids, but to embrace who they are. This was me as a child. Evidently, I was gifted. I did not know until 6th grade when I was asked if I wanted to go into honors classes. And I told my teacher that I thought she had made a mistake because I shouldn't have been in that group, because I too was dyslexic without knowing it. I had ADHD without knowing it. I was an average kid who was really happy with C's. But evidently there was something in my makeup that made my brain work differently than the, quote, smart kids in my class. So I was very much like my illustrated son. And the idea of this, the reality that green cannot be taken apart. So a child who is gifted and learning disabled or has learning difficulties is a very complex mix of colors that bring together one influence of color, if that makes any sense. You can't pull the colors apart. but positive self-identity and understanding what the obstacles in your learning are and what the obstacles in the learning environment are and how to work through those two things and work with your strengths is where I'm coming from. So I'm going to leave away the stereotypes and the mythology of that perfectly gifted child or that child that we're always going to support, and think about the kids that are currently existing in your classrooms or who you might be introduced to if you're in other programs where you're investigating what it is to be working with gifted kids. So, or with any child, because the twice exceptional kid is very possibly the jokester in your classroom, or is not your typical student. They might shout out. There's so many different pieces of their lives that might not look what you think of as gifted. But this is a quote, twice exceptional students are more likely to suffer identity confusion because of the vast differences between their abilities and challenges. The paradoxes within their learning, emotional, creative, and social profiles often leave them feeling inadequate, which is my son, and many of the students that I work with one-on-one. Identity confusion can be intensified by those educational institutions that misunderstand these students. And there's a lot of background to back this up, including quotes from our dissertation work. So there are many paradoxes. So just to give brief examples, high level of comprehension, but with reading and limitations, creative and sophisticated ideas, but they can't put it down on paper. Task commitment, they can really complete the task, but as long as it's only in their preferred areas, or they might not be able to keep track of what you are talking about auditorily. It might be just going too fast. Potential for expertise, but difficulty learning novice skills, and desire to fit in, but little social awareness. And we know that what that can be like. And at home, just can't find the shoes. 1,000 reasons for a new cell phone, but can't finish an assignment. Never notices when others don't share their passions, even though you're talking. Talks about specific and sophisticated topics, but doesn't relate to age peers, which goes on both sides, doesn't it? This is a model that I created. We were talking earlier, Jennifer was talking earlier about executive functions. Executive functions are incredibly complex, and so are these kids. So we need to consider their talents and their obstacles, their interests, which pull them into the learning environment, and their strengths. But we also have to realize that they have different environments that they're coping with on any given moment, which is their social, how they deal with their social environment, their personal creativity, their personal regulation emotionally, their intellectual needs, and their sensitivities and need to move or need to have a fidget. These are things that we need to be considerate of when we're working on a classroom environment. And on top of all of this is another layer of identity, which is everything else in their lives, what they have at home. And we don't know what that all means unless we really know the family and the child. And so that overlay can really impact the child and how they function or behave in a class. So what's the point here? So what I did was I developed a game that helps us focus on some of these identity issues by understanding the self-awareness. I originally developed this because I was about to work with some of the most phenomenal teachers that I knew, but I also knew that they were not serving one of my clients. So I was invited in to speak to the school. They were not understanding one of my clients who was twice exceptional, brilliant, profoundly gifted, and had all of the awkwardness that goes along with that. The gameplay reveals unintended biases, which again, those stereotypes that we were talking about, Jennifer was talking about earlier, and to reframe some of those. There are no winners or losers. When I'm playing this game with students, that's the hardest thing for people to figure out, and for some adults as well. It's an exploration. It's an exploratory game, and with forced choices. But it allows a safe flow of observations and implications among the participants, no matter what their age. We piloted this with groups of twice exceptional students. My recommendation for students is to play it with a group of 5 to 8 students in a nurturing setting, such as a counselor's room or a learning specialist room. For adults, I do it for parent groups, and I do this with teachers to understand their own personal biases. But it definitely, no matter what, it launches a new vocabulary and new discussion topics for later. So here we go. And I'm going to hopefully go into a new share.
So
And
Cynthia,
I'm looking at the time. Yes.
yeah, so as you are transitioning,
Yes.
I can see the game. So it looks like
Yeah.
the new share is working well.
Yeah.
I've got 2 volunteers that reached out to me in the chat.
Great. I'm going to close the chat then.
Cool. I will do a last call to see if there's anyone else, but you've got
If you have first names, I'm going to give them a hand.
you got it. So Sophie, Sophie, and Sudha, Sudha.
Thank you, Sudha. Okay, anyone else? It's really not stressful, I promise you. My whole idea is having fun as you learn. And I see one more chat. I don't know if that's a person that's asking a question or what.
I think that's Sophie just sharing kind of similar experiences and
there you go.
tools.
Okay. So I'm going to write down, let's see, I'm going to just put down a random name.
You've got one more. Michelle said she would join as well.
Thank you, Michelle. What, 1 L or 2?
2 L's and an E?
Yep. Michelle, and mind my handwriting. So this is the game, and this is the deck. And I'm going to show you what happens with the deck. So it's called the hand you were dealt because it is the hand you were dealt at the beginning. Think of the beginning of your life with your child. Think of the beginning of the semester with your students. You see a very limited piece of who they are, but it is what you get when you're dealt the hand. So this hand, it's the most efficient way I can do it, is going to be Sophie. So far it's advanced math skills, thrives on complexity, voracious reader, participates in class discussions with insight. And I'm going to continue as you glance. I'm going to add the rest of the cards here. Rarely completes work is our unknown mark or somebody else who wants to join. Michelle got difficulty with transitions. Sophie's last card is doesn't quit even when something is difficult.
So far you're on task. It's exactly me.
There you go. See, that's really interesting. Loves telling stories. Sudha got that.
I wanted to say that you're exactly on track too. This is like a tarot card or something.
Thank you. Thank you. I try. Mark, who is probably me, is impulsive. And then Michelle, you have constantly corrects others. So before we start the actual game, these are the cards that you were dealt. Does anybody else have any comments about what they see in any of the particular hands? Any strengths, any weaknesses? Would this child have an easy time in your class, etc.? And just verbalize. It's okay. Just unmute and go for it.
So I will add in and I will bring us back to Jennifer's presentation that talked about changes in the student or changes in the environment? And I'll leave
Thank
it
you.
at that.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I've had teachers say, well, this might be a student who needs extra help, but in my classroom, I have the environment where that's not an issue. Other people might say, but what are we going to do about those advanced math skills if we can't help that child go into a different math class? And I can't do it in my class with 35 kids. So it's kind of the extreme of, you know, that mythological gifted person. And then we have the child who's definitely going to have a little bit more struggle, but we don't know all of the details of this child. So I'm going to go back to, and I'm looking at that clock, boy, this is so much fun. I'm going to go back to our slide presentation and give you a little bit of a background on, and if I can go there. So we're going to, I'm going to roll the dice. And in rolling the dice, if you get a 5 or an odd number, you get to take from the deck. If you get an even, excuse me, I just messed up. If you get an odd number, you get to steal from someone else. You get to steal an attribute from somebody else. You get an even number, you get to pull from the deck. And if you get a 6, you get to trade. Okay, so you have no choice, limited choice, collaborative choices, and we always have trade-offs. So considering the hand you're dealt, think about these hands, who or what comes to mind. And those of you who are at home may play along mentally or make any comments that you would like and play with me as Mark. What would your ideal hand be? If this was a student of yours, what is the ideal student that you would be looking for? What are the traits that you would like to collect? And you don't know what the traits are. I understand that, but I'm going to be sharing those with you. What do you want to keep? What do you want to get rid of? What are you willing to get rid of? And so forth. Okay. So we're going to play the game, and I am going to share again. Lovely, complicated me. Okay, so Sophie, I'm going to go with you first, and I'm going to roll the dice for you. And you got a 6. So a 6 means that you get to initiate a trade with anybody else on the board. But you also have to get rid of one of the attributes. You can only have 5 at a time. So in case you're trading an attribute with someone else.
Goodness. I will trade thrives on complexity with is that Judah? Anxious about reading out loud.
Suda, do you agree to that trade? Or would I can't hear you?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So we're going to just trade, and this changes the hand just slightly, but it definitely changes the hand. So Suda, this is for you. You have an even number, so you get a new card. Your new card is inconsistent class and test performance. And now you have to get rid of one of your cards.
I can get rid of doesn't like asking for help.
Okay. That makes it hard, doesn't it? No matter what. Imagine our gifted kids and they're not going to ask for help because it might make them look weak. Or they don't think they should have to ask for help. And that really does mess them up. Okay, so for Mark, I've got a steal. So I get to steal anything. I love science. The most frustrating thing for me in my life has difficulty with handwriting. So I'm going to get rid of that. And I'm going to steal, I'm going to steal, let's see, loves telling stories. So thank you, Suda. And then Suda gets a new card, and that is a musician. Okay. All right. And then we're going to go to Michelle, and you have a new card taken from the deck. And this is your card. So what do you think?
Having difficulty unmuting.
No worries.
Okay, difficulty following verbal directions.
This is your new
And
card. You have to get rid of
I have to
something.
get rid of one. Okay, I would say struggles to explain ideas.
Okay. All right. We're going to go through one more time because of time. And as we're going through these things, I want you to think about what you would do and your consideration. How is this changing? How does this work for kids? What are the what's going through your mind as you're looking at these attributes? Okay. So Sophie, you get to steal from somebody else. Can't hear you. You can unmute it, people.
Sorry. I want to steal musician, and I will give up doesn't quit even when something is difficult.
Okay, that's more important. Okay. All right, and then we're going to give Suda another one, very literal. What you say is what you should mean. Okay, we know those kids, right? And Suda, you have one, so you get to steal.
I think I want to take voracious reader and give up a very literal.
Okay, and you can't steal back, by the way. Okay, so voracious reader and very literal, sorry, on the wrong person. Okay, and then Sophie, you get this card, loves Legos.
Yay, thank you.
Right? One of those things that's never in those, nobody asks about Legos, but those of us with gifted kids, boy, we're insane.
Yeah,
right,
that costs a lot of money. You find like gifted kids' parents at the Lego store.
Yes, and husbands, and I'm still stepping on them, and my kids are in their 20s. So I get to steal from someone else. I'm going to take spelling and math facts are quickly forgotten. I'm going to get rid of impulsive. And then I'm going to give Michelle a new card, easily distracted. Okay, and then Michelle, you get to steal.
Let's see. I will steal amazing ideas in problem solving.
Okay. And what are you getting rid of?
Difficulty with verbal directions.
Okay. All right. And then Suda, you get this one. Constant need for new and different things to think about. So were there any, what were some of the thoughts? And Matt, there might be some things in the chat. What were some of the thoughts that you had about what might be a positive trait, what might be a weakness trait?
Well, some things I saw in the chat are folks lamenting what they might have to do with Lego for the rest of their lives. But if you look behind me, I'm a grown person. There's still Legos on my shelves. It's fine. It's a lifelong hobby.
You don't see this side of the room for a reason, believe me.
Like I said, so what happens is the responsibility for buying them just shifts to your child as they get older.
That's so funny.
I think, as you were playing the game, folks were thinking about, well, what trait do I want? You can kind of see the thought process of like, what would be my barrier? And just from me personally, just looking at it, right? I think we all know kids like this. If you teach in an inclusive environment, you're gonna see kids with different needs, right? So, you've been talking about the mythic gifted learner, but I think we also have that mythic average child, right? Like there's that mythic
Absolutely.
across the spectrum. So I think, as you were all playing, I think everyone here in their day-to-day job, I'm just gonna go out and make an assumption. Everyone thinks about, how do I design my class to have supports for each of these students? And
Absolutely.
in a class of 30, you might have 6 of each of these students. So thinking about, how do I design it? And then I'm sure you'll talk about it in the game. So I'll stop there.
Well, and that's part of the process is when I'm playing this with parents or teachers, I'm listening to their comments. So Lego definitely was a topic that if I was doing this with parents, the parents would need to have a discussion about Legos and vacuum cleaners and so forth. But if there were, but it's also, the reality of having amazing ideas. Reading is exhausted, easily distracted. How many of those amazing ideas are going to come out in the classroom, and what is that environment that you need to create? So when I'm talking with teachers, it's yeah, these kids are in your class, but then they go home to the parents, and the parents live with them all night and all the weekends. And so that empathy building between the home and the school, to me, is really important. And I tell my parents, imagine 35 of these kids in a classroom. And how do you support the teacher to support your child? And how do you help your child cope with these other kids who are so different? And what happens when we teach the kids? I use with the kids, oh, it's right here. When I'm working with kids, we pick avatars, okay? So the avatar is the one that you're trying to promote. And then we talk about what happens if you are embarking on a new activity? How does that change the traits that you need? And what happens if you have to be kind at home, even when you're upset? And what are the traits that I need for that? So we talk about different pieces to make it safe for the kids to talk about this. And overall, we're talking about cognitive diversity. And is it okay to have these people in your group? Would this be a great group for you? Or would you need a different set of circumstances? How would you work with somebody else? If you know that they're anxious about reading out loud, that person shouldn't be reading the report, right? But there's still somebody who can do engineering because they love Lego. Or they might be able to build, they might be able to do a soundtrack and not have to speak at all, right? So working with all of these things, what are the best situations for each of these kids? And that is really the key to this idea and this game, no matter how it is used, is to build an understanding of other and to understand that, yes, sometimes there are no choices or limited choices, and we need those trade-offs. And this is what life is about. And our kids and our families have to deal with compromise and the sense of control. All of these have those ideas of, without the right environment, trauma is really easy to seep into a child's life. Okay. So this is a little bit more about some of the avatars that are used in the game, but I want to just talk really briefly about what I mean about trauma, because when we examine the language we use to describe the experiences, attributes, and traits of learners and peers, we reveal the emotional toll that may be unintentionally conveyed. So oh, my son's a great reader. And it's like, well, that's a great thing. It's really nice. But what happens if the child next to your great reader is struggling? And then that less fluent reader hears that reading is more important than maybe their artistic talents or something like that. But also, we also know that these great readers are reading during math class. So it's not always such a great thing if they're so, voracious. But the words that we use, intentional or not, are incredibly powerful. CACEC, which does games, is a clearinghouse for games used for social emotional learning, discusses how unintentional biases impact educational opportunities. Again, this is exactly what Jennifer was talking about in her talk. Stereotype threats is that sense of self when the person believes the words that are used, whether they realize it or not. It's ingrown. And one of the things that this game is trying to do is to expose some of those things, those inner beliefs, to shift and reframe them into strengths or positives, and in a community of a classroom to make it more welcoming for every type of mind and supportive. And what I found out through the playing of this game is that kids don't see themselves until they see it in print. So when they see a card that says anxious about reading out loud, then maybe they're not the only person in the world that is anxious. It's in print. So all of a sudden it's easier to recognize and accept because they're not alone. So often that trauma is caused by thinking they're the only kid that thinks that way, or they can't understand why other people are thinking differently. And it's a confusion between their mind and somebody else's mind. They don't understand what they're doing wrong. So it's really that reading is really crucial. So a couple of these other hands, so focused, perfectionistic, demands fairness. And this person might be a really the behavior in the class is they are, I love this. This is a parent that quote, highly creative avoider. Okay. They can figure out any way to avoid an assignment possible. What's behind that behavior? We're trying to figure out who that is. And maybe all it is they don't like asking for help. And we have to offer help, even though they are in the gifted classroom. So our twice exceptional students are hiding in plain sight in gifted classrooms, in resource rooms, in regular classrooms. And what is it that's stopping? What is their obstacle? So investigator, another one of this is a favorite quote of mine from one of my high school students. I'm holding off on homework, so I have something to do in class. Thank you very much. So this kid needs to be more. He needs more. He wants to learn. He is so desperate to learn, and the classroom just isn't doing it for him. So we have to be aware of those kids. What do we do? Handwriting is futile. And then there are kids who they don't see why they should excel. What's the point of doing the same thing over and over again? My son figured out how to get the grade he wanted. And he went to great mathematical lengths in order to get just enough points to go to the Magic Mountain trip, which is in Southern California. He was very, very good at figuring out exactly what he wanted. But this was also his issue. He needed time to process. So he couldn't do it, those mathematical problems with 100 on a sheet in 30 seconds. He didn't do it that way. He looked for all the zeros, all the ones, and he went methodically, but then he would also get tired out and he would just quit because he needed more time. He needed the time element taken away, and he needed, what do you want to know from me? And that's all I can have. That's all the energy I have to give to you. And this is probably the number one thing that I work on with my students is time especially when teachers are talking a lot, time to process the ideas. They just need time. So before was, they are not inclined to excel until those obstacles are recognized and solutions are discussed. And just to be, these are our kids, super bright, but also highly distracted. And what can we do with that creativity that's often everything is salient for them, everything is of interest for them. So how do we give them multiple things to do at the same time? And is that going to be the best thing for them? My task, our task as teachers, is to reframe those negative phrases. Reading is exhausting. How can we help you so that it's not so exhausting? Difficulty with transitions. How can we support you so that that transition isn't as difficult? Thrives on complexity. What complex thing can we help you with? And just reframing those negatives into positives, and how can we build on the strengths of the child? How can we even ask the child about their strengths? And I use several tools, including the suite of tools for that, which is another presentation. But we have to recognize that we all have these strengths, and what are the strengths within our challenges? So again, ADHD, people with ADHD are incredibly creative, but we have to help them get that product done. So I'm going to go through these really quickly. I've done game nights with parents, and I'm going to skip that. But we want to really nourish a positive identity formation. And these are, I usually don't read, but I'm going to, the ability of 2E individuals to wed one's cognitive and affective strengths to find a position of personal fulfillment is positive, not only for the individuals who flourish, but also for the larger society as well. And I end on a very familiar image, which I love. So I love that Jennifer used the same image. And I put it together with these lyrics from the song, This Is Me, because it talks about those sharp words and what those words can do to you, but to help our kids be brave and to be who they are meant to be. And I can take questions or go back or go forward. I have references at the back. I'm going to, I mentioned a resource, this resource, which is called the Suite of Tools. This is one of the ways that I investigate a child's strengths. And it's a survey and set of documents that really helps to build on what the kids' strengths are. I'll go back to my thank you.
So I have a question.
Yes, please.
That's in the form of a comment, and then I'll invite others to either drop a question in the chat or use the raise hand feature if they'd like to ask one.
Thank you. And I see that there's a bunch of chats that I missed, but that's
I'll try and synthesize those for you as well. So I guess my question, more of a comment, is when I think about adolescents and their sense of permanence, how like this thing that's happening to me now, or this thing that has happened to me, is going to be this way forever, or I'm going to be this way forever. I joked around in the chat earlier that like Suda's character was going through a metamorphosis. It felt like every role she was changing. And I guess, what is your experience? Like, do kids notice, hey, this is the hand I'm dealt, but like any other card game, cards and the deck changes over time?
Absolutely. And that's a wonderful, that's a wonderful metaphor, because we do change. As parents, we have to make these decisions. I can fix this, or I can fix this. I can talk to the math teacher about the repetitiveness of the homework, or I can have my child not do the homework at all and just be okay with that. So we have to make choices constantly, but yes, our kids change over time. And when I'm working one-on-one with these kids, they can choose from the whole deck. They can create their own profile. And in that profile building, we look at what are the obstacles at the moment. And then within those obstacles, where are those hidden strengths that they don't think about? So, for example, constantly corrects others, right? That sounds like imagine that child in the classroom with a sense of social justice, constantly telling the teacher that they misspoke. That would drive the teacher nuts unless there was an open communication. Thank you for correcting me because I know that you're correct. Can you cite your source? And there's a back and forth with a teacher, but usually it's interruptive and it's not appropriate at that time. So to help that child understand, yes, you can correct the teacher, but you have to figure out when is appropriate. And then you can have this wonderful discussion with the teacher and create a relationship. But it's not correct at that time. But just to have that discussion and that awareness shifts everything and helps that child grow and realize that they are validated for their truth and their knowledge, but they can really work with the teacher in a different way outside of the classroom. And yes, it has to be an open relationship to do that. But that child could grow up and be all sorts of different people. So one of the things that I also do is we talk about, well, what kind of job would that person might be great for that person? So for example, there's so can you see a specific job that any of these kids might really flourish? And it can change perspectives of what types of personalities really work well in a job, but also might work well in a group setting. Does that make sense? I don't know if I answered your question. I hope I did.
No, you did, right? So on the child side, it shows kids that you as a child or a person are going to change over time. But also for teachers, it's how are you designing that environment to be supportive?
Absolutely. That's a whole, I didn't go into environment, but that's another lecture.
Right.
That's talking about building all those strengths and how do you bring those into the classroom?
Absolutely. So I do want to highlight two more things in the chat. I invite everyone to read what Jennifer added just a little bit ago.
Oh, good.
So if you just scroll just up. It's a longer quote, but I'm going to leave it there for everyone. I invite them to go read it. I think building off of her presentation and yours, I think it's a great quote for everyone to read. Some questions about accessing your resources. I know some links were posted in the chat, but is there anywhere you would like to direct anyone to get more information on the hand they were dealt or anything like that?
Thank you for putting the resources. There are some resources that are listed in on my website, just like with Jennifer. And there are resources at the end of this slideshow as well. So on my website, there are links to other resources that are really wonderful. And there's also some other writing that I've done and other resources that are there.
Great. So I want to stop, double check to see if there are any other questions before we close out the evening.
And you can take a screenshot as well.
So if there are no other questions, I want to thank everyone. I want to thank our two presenters for just providing awesome information and resources. So again, Jennifer, Cynthia, thank you so much. I dropped a link in the chat to where you'll be able to find the recording of this webinar in the future. give us, a couple days to upload and get the website updated, but you can find all of our past webinars there. So maybe there's something else that will catch your eye. We're going to have webinars throughout the remainder of this academic year. So keep an eye out from emails from Cal State CEC. It's a Gmail account. So if you've got a .edu email, we might not be getting through your filter. So add us to your contacts. And be sure to visit our website, calstatecec.org. All of those are in the chat. And again, I just want to reemphasize that I appreciate both of your presentations, and I want to wish everyone a good rest of their afternoon and evening.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you, Jennifer.